Hi, everybody, and welcome back to yet another cracking edition of the Matt Brown Show. This is the Secrets of Scale series where we're talking to just people who think at scale and who build things at scale. And with us on the line is none other than Gary Bengier. Gary, welcome to the show.
Well, Matt, I'm delighted to join you. Thanks.
No, that's all good, man. So tell us, what have you? Give us the elevator pitch. Like, what have you been up to, or what are you up to these days?
Well, as to my background, I spent over almost 30 years in Silicon Valley in tech, a whole series of companies in a bunch of different fields, from life sciences to computer peripherals to chip design, EDA, and streaming video, the kind of thing for your YouTube here. That technology with a company called vExtreme that became Microsoft's media player. And then the internet, I was the CFO that took eBay public, and I hung around there, scaling that for enough years until it was $100 billion worth of stuff being sold and thousands of people. And then after that, I went on to a bunch of other things. And most recently, I've written a book, a novel called Unfettered Journey, that is a look at the near future. And it includes a lot of things that deal with this topic of scaling, and particularly AI, which seems to be the hot topic of today.
Cool, and that's what we're going to focus on today. I know it's top of mind for me, and I'm sure many of us also. So we can get into all of that. Gary, why did you write the book Unfettered Journey?
Well, I after my tech career, I actually went back to school. I backfilled an astrophysics degree. Then I backfilled a degree in philosophy. Got a master's in philosophy, focused on philosophy of mind and theory of mind. And then I started thinking about, what is human consciousness? And there's a lot of deep thought in the philosophy that most people aren't aware of, and I decided to try to make that a little bit more accessible to the average person, and one way to do that is by a novel. So that's how I wrote the book. The book, as I said, is a hard science look at the near future being the next 140 years, and the main character there is an AI scientist who is trying to figure out if it's possible to make robots and AIs conscious. So this is a book that came out during the pandemic, and it seems to be even more relevant today than it was a couple of years ago.
Well, let's get into it, right? So what's the premise of the book? I know it's about a scientist who's looking to it's almost like the scientist in your story is almost like my audience. We're also trying to figure shit out, and how much is hype, how much is real, and how does this technology actually change? I mean, I spoke to a CEO yesterday, and his company, massive thing, they're doing just south of $1 billion, and what they're doing is they're literally building AI applications. And so it's certainly, and he was saying basically, like this is like the internet. So imagine life before the internet. This is like the internet, right? There's the same sort of scale event, right, where we don't get to go back afterwards once it's been built, and so how much of this is hype? I mean, would you agree that this is like the internet, the birth of something completely transformative that we just never ever going to turn off?
Okay, those are a lot of questions, and let me try to parse it apart. At the highest level, I'll say this: when I wrote the book, I'm looking ahead to in this century plus. And I think that one can say some things that are highly likely based upon where this technology is going. And, I can't predict what will happen tomorrow because the world is nonlinear. Who knows? Maybe the Ukrainians will take back Crimea in their counteroffensive. Who knows? But I can tell you what's highly likely. And what I can say is that the two most important technologies that will change our century are bioscience, and then secondly, AI and robotics. And the thing I will say is that bioscience will make a dramatic change into our health, our length of our lives, but we won't notice, okay? Because it'll be normal to live to be 90 to 100, to have cancer cured. And so, yes, that's going to be dramatic, but we won't notice it in our day-to-day lives as much because it will be quote unquote normal. But AI and robotics, that is where we will notice. Okay, that's important to think about. We will have robots walking around among us doing all kinds of jobs in a century to a century and a half. And so think about that at the top level. Highly likely that will happen. Why? Because economically it makes sense, right? The military is going to spend tons of money to robotize the battlefield so that people won't die and just machines will get destroyed. And so there's an economic incentive. There will be an incentive to replace all kinds of jobs. Just as we've had automation in plants going on for the last 30, 40 years that have dramatically changed jobs, this is going to accelerate. Okay, so that I think is highly likely to happen. And so that's going to be the biggest challenge for, quite honestly, humanity in the century. How do you make that transition from having the jobs we have today to having very few jobs and having a lot of robots and a lot of AI making a lot of stuff? So we'll have lots of stuff and not very many jobs. That's a key theme in my book. Okay.
I think one of the things that I'm kind of like a big believer in, it's like this, because this, by the way, isn't something new. This kind of like, AI is coming to replace your jobs, and this kind of stuff. I think it's more a case of, AI will replace the jobs we don't want to do, but if you're working with AI, you're still going to remain relevant. It's those sitting on the fence or who are not interested or curious about, well, how could I use AI? In other words, not even curious about what the application of artificial generative intelligence or general intelligence could be for their business. They're just sitting, they're like dinosaurs trying to climb trees, like they've got shareholders, they've been
Good
around.
image.
Yeah, I know you're a visual guy, but it's this idea of like, you have to use it. Like I said this the other day to someone, it's like, AI for me is my co-founder, it's my copywriter, it's my business strategist, it's my commercial modeler, it's my product designer. It's basically, as a founder with a vision, if you're curious and working with AI, you have a much greater probability of being successful because your speed to market, your time to value, all those things are like way exponentially more accessible than ever before. So it's that guy who's going to win. It's that girl who's going to win. But the guys and the girls that are going to lose are the ones that are like, nah.
I totally agree with you, Matt, and I am an optimist, but I'd have to say there is a dark side to this, and that is who's going to win and who's not. And I think so many jobs are going to go away that's going to cause a tremendous amount of social pressure. Think about the folks that graduate in the bottom quarter of your high school class, right? Will they have the capability to use this technology, or is it their job that's going to go away? So, how are we going to deal with the fact that this is going to have such a transformative effect on the kinds of jobs that are out there? So that's a challenge. So you asked me, is this hype though? Let me back up a minute again. Let me go down another level, because I think for your audience, let's get beyond the hype. Okay. Mm-hmm. And I'll preface that by saying just a few weeks ago, I was down at the Santa Fe Institute. I'm been a board trustee for quite a while. And the topic of the seminar was the complexity of knowledge. Okay. And we had a number of AI experts there, people like Melanie Mitchell and others. And actually, they were reporting on a workshop that had happened the week before, which was entitled AI and the Barrier to Meaning 2.0. I had attended the AI and the Barrier to Meaning 1.0 workshop a few years before. And which was focused a lot on, can AIs become conscious, right? So let me give you and your audience a little bit of background about those two events, because I think it's very relevant to this conversation. The In the field of AI researchers, there have been a couple of AI winters. That is a lot of hype. Okay, expert systems in the 90s, as an example, and then an AI winter. All the hype was shown to be overblown, and then everyone poo-pooed AI for a while. So that's happened at least 3 times in the past. So a number of the folks that have been around this block before are concerned that there'll be another AI winter. So that's on the topic. And out of this workshop, the head of chief AI scientist at Meta, Juan LeCun, said, quote, "Within 5 years, no one will be talking about LLMs, large language models," unquote. Which is a shocking statement, right? This is the hype. This is ChatGPT 3, ChatGPT 4. These are LLMs, large learning models. So how does one parse apart all that stuff? So let me make 3 statements. I think, number one, there's a lot of breathlessness about AIs now, but we are no closer with LLMs to sentience or consciousness in robots. That's number one. Okay. Remember about a year ago, some Google scientist reported that he thought that he suddenly saw sentience in the AIs. So no, that's not happening. And I can go into depth about how the code works, about why that's true. Second statement. I think there will be another AI winter. I agree with the fact that where these models are now, there is a reason why they will get to a point, and then, getting to that next stage of making sentient robots is a long way away. And the third statement is that I think that that there will be at least a decade of innovation out of LLMs and this deep learning, at least, and we're going to see a lot of money being made and a dramatic transformation in so many fields, okay? Because experts in almost any field you can imagine are going to have their quote-unquote holy shit moment, where they're going to say, holy shit, look what this AI can do in my field. So that's a lot of statements, but Matt, to get back to what you said, it will help me, it can help me in my work, I better be on the top of it. 100% agree.
Yeah. So, I don't have a problem with it being sentient, even if it was. You know what I mean? I think it would raise some ethical considerations. Like I call ChatGPT Susan, like who cares? It's just a label. As long as it gives me utility and solves problems for me and I'm able to scale what I'm doing, then as an entrepreneur, as a CEO, then I'm all in, and even and you're right, like with regards to, large language models and so on and so forth. I think we're very romanced with one particular model, which is ChatGPT. I think it's an entirely different ballgame to train AI on your own data set. And if you take, for instance, like venture capital, right? There's no data set for seed stage startups because they don't exist. You know what I mean?
Right.
Like there's no data to train them on. So if you're trying to deploy AI into the venture capital space, and so that you're able to empower venture capitalists to make better informed investment decisions, where do you get the data from? So that's one context. Like the data actually has to be there. There's another. My team actually put me onto this this editing software. I forget the name of it now. I keep forgetting about it. But basically, what this allows editors to do is to literally put content, unedited content, up into a timeline. And this AI, you just hit it, and it would edit like an hour-long video podcast with multiple cameras, cutting between who's speaking, what, why, when. Like I'm still switching between the scenes here, for instance, right? Which is ridiculous. But this thing can basically edit an hour's worth of footage perfectly, right, in 7 minutes. So you're saving an hour of edit, maybe even more, of editing time. And so, I'm starting to see instances where use cases don't, who knows when that will become like the venture capital one, but I'm seeing use cases now in everyday applications for even just what I'm doing. And again, I think it goes back to this idea of scale in terms of, are you prepared to embrace it or not? Because if you are prepared to embrace it, then suddenly you can do things faster than your competition. Simple idea, right? But speed actually matters. And so, I don't know, I'm very bullish on AI. My dad was here actually yesterday. He's 72, and I showed him ChatGPT, and his mind was like, it literally, you could watch it literally melt.
he had the holy shit moment, yes.
And he's like, and even he was saying, it's like, I'm actually not afraid of it. I think this is a great thing. And I guess the question I have for you is, how much should we be afraid of this thing replacing jobs versus actually, let's be positive. You also said you're a positive individual, right? Like, yes, it's going to replace some jobs. Yes, it's going to create social pressure, but society will be a better place because visionary founders, startups, CEOs can do things better for their customers. They can, wasn't this AI like it figured out all the protein sequences for the human body or something like that? Like, that's going to create breakthroughs in medical technology. So I'm more in the camp of like, I hear some of the fear, but if you choose to think, positively about, well, how can I use this thing? I think society would be in a better place. I'm wondering, with your philosophical viewpoint, whether this is completely wrong to think or whether you agree or not.
I think it's going to be mixed, especially in this first decade when we're going to see it so many applications. For example, a friend of mine has been playing with this. Just wrote using the ChatGPT 3 sort of engine, if you will, and all the open source stuff that's out there. He wrote a program that creates a full movie script, and he puts the prompts in, boom, and it does a great job. Okay. I believe really soon we're going to see companies putting out the software that allow you to produce a personalized Siri, your own personal AI. You can imagine you take your calendar and a bunch of your contacts and you feed it into this stuff, and this thing will be personalized for you, Matt. Okay. Mm-hmm. And that'll make you a lot more efficient. And yes, you will anthropomorphize that, because humans tend to do that. You're going to feel this is part of you. That's the opening scene in my book, by the way. Unfettered Journey is the AI scientist dealing with his Siri, 5.0 that resides in his head. Okay, in the chip that's connected to a corneal implant, where you're connected to the internet, and you can just say something and you get the data downloaded and you see it on your eye. Okay, and that's integrated. We can imagine that will be your iPhone in 100 plus years, right? So, but that AI is going to be available soon. And I mentioned the scripting, writing a script. Okay, well, look what's happening with the Hollywood screenwriters. I think they have a real reason to be afraid of AI. And so we're going to see enormous disruption, okay? Just enormous, because of these large learning models.
Mm. Yeah, I think it's going to democratize access to a lot of things, So I've never written a film script before. I have an idea for clients of mine. We want to create a film script for. I was actually chatting to the former vice president of the NASDAQ, and he has a show he wants to do. On Broadway sort of thing. But, if he was my client and I didn't have the knowledge base to do that, I would absolutely use a tool like the one that your mate's developing, right? Because it democratizes access for me without any experience to do amazing, innovative work there. I've got another use case, like for books, right? So I actually think the book industry is like some astronomically huge number. Book publishing, it's a ridiculously massive industry.
Yeah, there's about 4,000 books that are uploaded onto Amazon and the other platforms every day.
Every day, yeah. Yes. It's ridiculous, yes. Yeah. And so the ability to feed 80,000 words to an AI and have it spit out or generate 80% of a finished book within an hour is the kind of thing that's going to transform in like the book industry, right? And so The
Yeah,
concern,
we're going to
though,
have a wave of bad stuff out there to
well,
wade
that's
through.
exactly right, and that's kind of where I was going, because you have to be careful around what it's generating, right? Plagiarism's another thing. What language model was it actually trained on, or what data set was fed to it? Is it borrowing
Yeah,
from
yeah.
thousands of books that already exist? Like you
Yeah,
can wind up in
Matt,
shit.
on that point, at this conference, AI and the Bearing Meaning 2.0, there was a Harvard lawyer who said LLMs stand for large libel models because there'll be so many lawsuits that come out of this.
Yeah, it's ridiculous. So, how do we best approach this opportunity as founders or entrepreneurs? And I'm curious to know, how does your background in economics and business inform your perspective on the impact and potential uses of AI?
Yeah, well, I made the point that I think it's going to be highly disruptive in this decade because there's a lot of bad things that can happen immediately. Bad things. I mean, that's why we had testimony at Congress by the OpenAI CEO that was asking for regulation, surprisingly. And I mean, imagine what can happen if certain foreign countries use AI to use these LLMs to cause lots of fake accounts on social media to be promulgating certain messages. I mean, I think that is absolutely going to happen next year for the election. Okay, this could throw elections in certain countries. We just saw, the election in Brazil was a worry a year ago about social media being used to influence it, and so there's going to be a lot of negative things that can come out of this because they're so powerful and because they're open source. Here's something for your audience that most folks perhaps have not focused on, and that is that who's going to control this wave of LLMs, this deep learning set of models? And certainly you're looking at the big players, Google, Meta, Facebook, and Microsoft with OpenAI. But people may not have noticed that just a couple of weeks ago, Meta, quote unquote, released the weights. What that means is that they have allowed into the open source ecosystem the key pieces of technology for those models, and that means that the small companies now have access to it. Okay, so can I go deep a little bit more into the code, because I think this is something most people don't know. So these large learning models are different than symbolic code. Symbolic code, you've got take Google Translate. Back in the early days, you've got English, you translate it to Spanish. How did that work? Well, what you did is you had symbolic models. So you brought together a bunch of computer scientists, linguists, translators. They started with English. They wrote the rules for grammar, right? They put those into code, if-then statements. Here's the sentence in English. Run it through the code, the output is Spanish. Okay, that's how it worked. What does an LLM, what does deep learning do? Very different. What they did is that they went to places like the UN, where you've got all kinds of languages being translated by the best translators in the world, right? Lots and lots of text. So now they have a great data set, okay, between English and all these other languages. They take all that data set, so they have the English on one side, for example, and the other language on the other end. They have both ends of the thing, but they don't have the rules. And the model then figures out the rules from the endpoints. Okay, exactly the same kind of thing when you start with a bunch of pictures, and is it a cat or not? And that was the that was the beginnings of image recognition software. Okay, so the models then, between that input and the output, it has what are called hierarchies in between. Okay, think of it as a bunch of layers, and the layers are essentially, in mathematical terms, a hyperspace. Okay, I think the Google models has over 500 billion dimensions, if you will. Okay, so you've got lots and lots of complexity in there, in between, and what the code really does is something very simple. That you you may have learned in high school calculus, which is called the chain rule in calculus, that finds local maximums and minimums. Okay, and so think of it as a topology space with hills and valleys. If you think of a three-dimensional space, and it finds the low points, it finds the minimum. Okay, and so you're trying to find, is that a local minimum or a global minimum? And you run the model and you tweak it between the beginning and the end. Is it a cat or not? And that finds these minimums. And then you use something called backpropagation, and gradient descent. Gradient descent is the algorithm, which is the chain rule. And what that does is it gives you the parameters. Okay, so now the code runs through all of that data and keeps on iterating until it finds a model that optimizes it and that doesn't overfit the data. And that's the model. And once you've got that huge model with all of those weights, you have the answer. Okay, and so that's how it works. Okay, that's what those things did, and that's what they released. They released the weights. They released those parameters that are in that model. Well, now that they've released those, it's out there in the open source world. So everyone else can use those, all of that huge data that is language, and they can use it to do other things. As I said, for example, write an AI for UMet.
Can you just get it done? I'd like it done now, thanks. Because I need it.
So that's a long explanation, but I think it's important to understand what's really going on. And so I hope that showing the card trick, how the card trick is done, maybe it's now understandable why this is not conscious. It's just a calculus rule.
How would we ever know if it was actually conscious?
Well, now you're getting into philosophy, right?
Yeah. I mean, because I think there's the practical, logical side of scaling a company with AI, which I'm a big proponent of. I want to talk to you about some of the challenges that you see in that context in a moment. But also there's the ethical side, right? And the kind of like, well, should I be using this if it's going to, reduce my workforce by half? Do you know what I mean? Like, I think there's the philosophical side of this conversation, and then there's the practical side. So on the philosophical side, what is your point of view there? Are we ever going to know if this thing's actually conscious? Like, when would we know if it was?
Okay, well, I continue to have a debate with one of my colleagues at the Santa Fe Institute about that very topic. As I said, my master's in philosophy is on theory of mind, and what is consciousness really, right? What is it really? That's as David Chalmers calls it, the hard problem of consciousness, and I think that we don't know what it is. I think that finding the answer to that is an extraordinarily hard problem. I think that it is not something as simple as you see in code. Okay. And I don't think we're going to see conscious robots for centuries, if ever. That's my belief. But people will differ. And I think that conversation is one of the problems with science fiction today, quite honestly, because people are caught up on that thing. And you went to the ethical question, well, what happens is if the robots are conscious, do we really have an ethical issue with then using them? There's Ishiguro wrote a book, Kara and the Sun, recently, that starts to imagine inside a robot's head what seems like the beginnings of consciousness. A lot of science fiction does that. I don't think we really have to worry about that problem anytime soon. And so that's a different view. I mean, here, let's go back to the economics, because you asked that question. I think that's key. What is this future in this century and a half going to look like? What I think it's going to look like is we'll have more and more AI, more and more robots. We're going to see robots building the robot factories, right? And once robots build the robot factories, then there's just an enormous number of robots. We can have, Matt, you can have 20 robots doing stuff for you, right? So you're going to have lots of stuff, but you're not going to have very many jobs at all. And that's the reality for this century. And is that utopian or dystopian? Well, we can imagine a society where we have lots of stuff, and we'll have robots that are doing stuff for us. And I don't believe there'll be an issue with any ethical issue with those robots. They're just machines. Okay, and so that sounds like a utopia. Right? A utopia that will have lots of stuff and lots of robots doing things for us. But the difficulty, the biggest challenge for humanity in the Western world is that I think the jobs will disappear far faster than the robots will make more stuff. And so how do we cross that economic chasm of having, if we have our market-based capitalist system that has the means of production in the hands of individuals, the equity of wealth will be a continuing challenge.
Yeah, I don't think I'd ever be comfortable with a robot babysitting my kids.
Really? Why not?
No, because it's not, you know what I mean? Like it's not conscious. Like I don't know, like could you ever trust a machine that much with the thing that matters most to you? And I think to your point, there's the economic stuff and then there's the ethical stuff. You know what I mean? Like, you know what I mean? Like this, like we have constant problems here with sitters in Denver. It's actually fucking annoying because they're so unreliable. Like there was this one, we wanted to go out for my wife's birthday. And it was like, scramble. Eventually we found this one. She's 23. I don't know whether it's a Gen Z story or not, but nonetheless, see you at 7 for the handover. Yeah, okay, cool. See you then. And then totally ghosted.
Okay, but
you know what I mean? So
but imagine your AI your robot will be there. It's just code, right? So I agree. I actually agree with the point, and I believe what will happen is that for this next century, it's the unknown unknowns that will get us. They're going to be really annoying, right? And they're going to make mistakes, and people are going to die, right? I mean, a few months ago, here in San Francisco, I got into one of these self-driving cars, and pulled up. I got in, drove me around the city, dropped me off. A little eerie sitting in the back seat, and nothing's in the front seat, right? That will become normal, right? Now, people will die in between. They already are dying in some of these self-driving cars. They will die. What happens in my book? The character Joe gets in the plane, right? Plane takes off. Of course, it's all autopilot. Now, the systems will actually allow planes to take off and land themselves today. That is true. You don't really need the pilot there. 99% of the time. But we're going to have that pilot there for a while because, there'll be problems. There was the one plane, which will remain nameless, that, a couple of them went down because there were problems. And the pilots want a big red button on the back seat there. They slam that big red button and it puts it into full manual so that they don't have to worry about overriding software and figuring it all out on the fly. So, we're going to have that be a problem. And there's a scene in my book, Unfettered Journey, that deals with that. What happens in the future when these machines kill people? How will we feel about that, right? Won't we feel like some need for vengeance?
Well, I hate to point out the obvious, but drones have been killing people in Pakistan and Afghanistan for years. So, it's not, I think if it kills people, in other words, like, how's this? So yesterday I took my dad to the airport and I bought my wife a new Telluride. And so I put it on cruise control. But then you start to notice what's happening with the steering. So the car, and I actually took my hands off the wheel. I was like, hang on, let me see what's actually going on here. And this car is completely autonomous. It's not just Tesla. And so it's driving, and then it even goes, put your hands in the steering wheel, And so, but like I felt comfortable enough just to let it drive me. And I was like, fuck, why am I even in the driver's seat? Do you know what I mean?
Well, you're braver than I am.
Yeah. Well, but
it's, it's the unknown unknowns that will kill us.
But I think if the technology, drove the car off the road, and I died, like that would be an issue. But I think, I think we've been, especially in the military context, that stuff's been going on for a long, long time. It has been.
Yes, I totally agree. And in fact, in my book, again, to the military, okay, what's that look like? There's a debate now. Should we allow the machines to make the kill shot, right? Without any human intervention? In my book, I imagine there's a scene where there's, robots that are fighting. And in that context, the world has agreed that the only two cases where you're allowed to have autonomous kill machines are in prisons and in border control. Other than that, you're not allowed to. So, yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Well, this is why aliens need to come around, because then we can start building these robots just to go and, mess up their day.
Yeah. And here's the thing about the future. Okay, the other thing about the future. I said that I think that science fiction tends to take the extreme cases, right? It takes some idea and technology and runs to the extreme. And there's a lot of apocalyptic future sci-fi out there, and I think the reality is different. It's that our technology is going to continue to be a challenge. It's going to accelerate change, and it's going to take longer for some of these things to make a change than we imagine. How fast will these AIs really be among us? My book takes place in the year 2161. Because no, it's not going to happen this decade. We're not going to have robots walking around by 2050, really. We've got too many engineering problems to solve. And we've got to get the legal infrastructure in place, We've got to deal with what happens when they kill us accidentally, that kind of stuff, right? Yeah. There's this social infrastructure that has to happen. But it's highly likely that will happen eventually at some time period like that. And but we're still going to be humans. That's not going to change, okay? And we're not going to be living in some metaverse.
No,
the real world is too darn interesting.
Understood. Right? So one of the things that I'm curious to ask you is about the applications of AI, real world applications of AI in making scalable business models more sustainable, more environmentally friendly. I think one of the key things that I talk about a lot and have done for years, is probably why I started doing this show like 10 years ago, was the fact that most businesses don't survive past the first year. And even, then you go 5 years ahead, it's even a lower number. And everybody loves to talk about the contribution of entrepreneurs and startups and small businesses to the economy. They're the backbone of the economy, yet most of them die. Most of them can't get funding. And so if we can, as a community, look at AI in a positive context or frame and say, look, well, how can we apply these? If we democratized access to AI, there's a guy in my network called Adam Grant that's doing this, called graft.io. And he wants to democratize access to AI for businesses, right? So instead of trying to figure out how to train and do your own LLMs and stuff like that, that's already done. There's pre-built libraries you drag and drop, and you're like 80% there. And so I'm passionate about businesses not dying, and so if we can look at AI and say, well, if there's positive opportunities here to create more successful businesses, take a business doing $1 million a year, get him to do 2 million or 10 million. How many more people could we employ? As an example, like how much more of a contribution could we make? Could we tackle problems, as a team that historically were just beyond our grasp or beyond our reach because AI wasn't an option, right? And now, yes, it is. So, in that context, Gary, I'd love to get your views on, what role can AI play in kind of making scalable business models or just businesses in general more sustainable?
Well, I guess I'd first say that your facts about small businesses dying quickly, even the oldest businesses tend to die within a century. You look at the statistics, hardly any companies live that long. And I think that with this technology, actually, that's going to be faster. The death rate, it's going to become more Darwinian, unfortunately. So it's going to be harder to stay in the game. And AI is just going to make businesses more susceptible to getting killed early. Sorry, I think
Why?
that's the reality.
But why though?
Because technology means that the monopolies that one could build up, mini monopolies to stay in business for a while, um, are less sustainable. I mean, here's what is it? Google's $170 billion company or something.
Mm.
AI is an existential threat to the most of that revenue, right? If they don't get the ad revenue from that. So yeah, so I don't see AI actually helping sustainability. Sustainability is one of our climate change is one of our largest existential threats to humanity this century. We still haven't figured it out. It looks like we're clearly going to blow through the 1.5 degrees C temperature rise. Is it going to be above 2 degrees Celsius or 3 before we get our arms around it? In my book, I'm an optimist. In 140 years, the character Joe looks up the data and says, well, the good news is after dealing with that crisis, humanity has kind of figured out how to put it in the box. And so it's only 17 centuries until we get back to baseline. And meanwhile, we've lost Venice and Jakarta and Mumbai, right? So, yeah.
Mm. So what does the future then look like? I mean, if AI, to your point, is going to make, the world of startups or small businesses less sustainable, less defensible, then what does the dystopian landscape then look like in the future?
Well, and let me preface by saying, I'm a market capitalist. I think that's the system that has allowed us to create a lot of stuff per person, right? As an example, the statistic I heard is that the folks that left Castro's Cuba and went to Miami in the U.S. have on average 7 times as much stuff as the people they left behind. Okay, so it works, and certain kinds of Marxism do not work because you need the incentives at this point. So that said, what happens when robots build the robot factories, right? And we've got tons of robots, and everyone has lots of robots. Whoever owns the robot factories is going to have an absolute gazillion dollars, right? So, and at the same time, all these jobs will be going away this century for sure. And there are not enough other jobs. This will be different. It's not like in the past everyone's waved their hands and said yes, but new jobs have come up. When the horse-drawn wagon went away, we had automobiles, and people moved from making horses and all making saddles, and they went to things that went with cars. That's not going to happen this time. We're going to have a lot fewer jobs. And so I think we have a social justice issue to deal with, right? And I think the ultimate answer, here's a capitalist speaking, is that the robot factories need to be owned commonly. It's a common resource. But we still won't have jobs. And so what do you do? How do you find purpose in that world? I mean, you mentioned about books. There's 4,000 books a day being uploaded. There are over 100,000 songs being uploaded every day to the song sharing sites. There's a lot of content out there. We all can't be poets. And what are we going to do with our time? So, that is one of the themes in my book, Unfettered Journey, which is kind of why it's won 14 minor book awards already, including spiritual fiction and science fiction and adult fiction and science fiction in terms of its hard science view. So it's doing all those things at once, looking at the future, and I think in a clear-eyed way about what the real problems are for humanity and how are we going to get past this.
So, Gary, curious then, what's your advice to a founder, entrepreneur, CEO out there about scaling their company in an AI-enabled world? Like, what comes to mind as words of wisdom or an insight, anything like that come to mind for you?
Well, you have to pay attention. You cannot ignore what AI will be doing, particularly this next decade as these deep learning models, LLMs, come into the play, because if you think that they're not going to touch your space, you're wrong. You're going to see it in so many aspects of life. And so, yeah, it's going to be a churn, I think, because of the applications. And again, as I said, because some of the software is now open sourced and lots of small companies will be playing to build, experiment. And so there's, it's already out of Pandora's box here. Okay. And so this is going to be a very interesting decade. It's not going to be conscious, it will run its course as the applications are found. So you asked, is this as transformative as the internet? I don't think so, but it's going to be extremely transformative, not quite at that scale, but very transformative in terms of changing our lives in so many ways.
Mm-hmm. Well, I'm excited to see if you're right. So thank you, Gary, for being on the show, brother. Appreciate you lending your perspective. Congratulations, by the way, on an amazing book and all the awards that you've won. It's great to hear someone actually leading the conversation in the space. So thanks for being on the show.
Great. Thanks for having me, Matt.
Anytime. Thanks, Gary. Thanks, everybody.